Farmer sees elderly woman with snake around her neck about to die. Then he does this. Comment what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and tell me which city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The oppressive May heat in Mason Creek weighed on William Harrison's shoulders like a damp shroud. At 58, he had learned to carry the weight of loneliness with the same resignation he carried sacks of feed for the cattle. The weekly livestock auction had been another failed attempt to sell the last calves left from his herd, but buyers were scarce and prices were disheartening. The old pickup truck rumbled down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of reddish dust that stuck to his sweaty skin and the worries that wouldn't leave his mind. Eleanor had left 3 years ago, taking not only the love of his life, but also the family's savings, spent on treatments that promised miracles and only brought debt. Cancer won, as it always seems to, and left William with a hole in his chest and another in his bank account. The farm his father built with sweat and toil was slowly dying, just as everything around him seemed to be dying in this corner of the country, forgotten by God and the government. That's when he saw the scene that would change everything. An elderly woman collapsed on the side of the road, as still as an abandoned rag, and something dark and sinuous coiled around her neck. William slammed on the brakes so hard he was almost thrown forward. His heart pounded, not from the urgency of the moment, but from the primitive panic the sight of the snake awakened in his gut. Ever since a rattlesnake nearly killed him in his backyard as a child, snakes had been the absolute terror of his life. His hands trembled as he got out of the pickup, breaking into a cold sweat despite the scorching heat. The woman was unconscious, her breathing faint and irregular, and the serpent seemed as lethargic as she was, as if both were trapped in some macabre spell. "Jesus Christ, give me courage," William muttered, grabbing a long rod he always kept in the truck. With careful movements and a heart beating like a drum, he managed to push the snake away without waking it. The animal slithered through the grass and disappeared among the rocks, leaving behind only the musky scent of danger. The woman was thin, her skin marked by time and a lack of care. Her grey hair stuck to her sweaty face, and she wore a simple dress that had seen better days. William carried her to the pickup with the delicacy of someone holding a wounded bird, feeling the fragility of her bones beneath her thin skin. At the small-town clinic, Nurse Betty received the pair with the typical fuss of someone living in a place where any novelty becomes an event. "Lord, have mercy, William. Where did you find this poor creature?" The woman was dehydrated and exhausted, but nothing that an IV drip and rest couldn't fix. While she slept on the makeshift bed, William stayed there, not quite sure why. When she woke up, her eyes stared at him with a confusion that broke his heart. "Arthur," she asked in a hoarse voice, extending a trembling hand. "You came back, my love." William didn't have the heart to correct her. There was something in the lost gaze of that woman that spoke directly to his own loneliness. "What's your name, Mom?" he asked gently. "Evelyn," she replied, and then, with a sweet smile that completely transformed her weathered face, "Evelyn Reed, wife of Arthur Reed, mother of 6 children and grandmother to I don't know how many grandchildren." Her voice carried a melancholic pride, like someone reciting a list of achievements that no longer meant anything. Nurse Betty whispered in William's ear that the woman seemed to have mental problems, probably Alzheimer's or something similar. There was no known family in the area, and someone mentioned seeing her wandering the streets for a few weeks, apparently homeless. And so William found himself taking Evelyn home. It wasn't a conscious decision, but rather something that sprang from a need he couldn't name. The house was too big for one man alone, and maybe it was too big for one woman alone too. As he prepared the guest room that hadn't seen visitors in years, William wondered if he was going crazy or if he was finally regaining his sanity. Evelyn settled into the house with the naturalness of someone who had always belonged there. She called William Arthur most of the time, told stories of a prosperous farm where she had raised her children, and sometimes cried softly in the kitchen, looking out the window as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. In her moments of lucidity, which came and went like clouds in the sky, she spoke of abandonment. The children who had vanished into the world, the farm lost to creditors, the family that forgot her when the money ran out. "They threw me away like an old rag," she would say, and William felt a dull anger towards people he didn't even know. It was during one of these conversations that she mentioned Sarah. "My youngest daughter," she explained, her eyes welling up. "I lost her when she was little. My husband's brothers took her away, said it was for the best. I never saw her again." The pain in Evelyn's voice was so real that William felt his chest tighten. Sarah. William knew a Sarah, the local school teacher, in her early 40s, beautiful despite her severity, always too serious for small-town standards. He had admired her from afar for months, ever since he started seeing her at the market, buying vegetables with the thriftiness of someone who counts every penny. He had tried to talk to her a few times, but she always treated him with a coldness he couldn't understand. Could it be possible? In a town like Mason Creek, where everyone knows everyone, could it be that Evelyn was the mother of the woman who stirred something in him with just a distant glance? The discovery came by chance, one afternoon when Evelyn had a crisis and started screaming her daughter's name. William, desperate to calm her, promised he would take her to see Sarah. It was then that Evelyn, with a sudden and frightening lucidity, grabbed his arm with surprising strength and said, "She doesn't know I exist. They told her I died." The revelation hit William like a lightning bolt from a clear sky, illuminating all the pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know he was assembling. At the school, when he showed up with a trembling Evelyn by his side, Sarah turned pale as wax. The meeting was a disaster. She denied any kinship, accused William of taking advantage of a mentally ill woman, and threw him out of the school with words that cut deep. But William had seen the recognition in her eyes, the fear, the poorly hidden pain. The weeks following the disastrous encounter at the school were a silent hell. Evelyn fell into a deep depression, refusing to eat and spending her days sitting on the porch, watching the road as if expecting Sarah to appear at any moment to ask for forgiveness. William found himself torn between caring for a woman wasting away from sadness and dealing with his own disillusionment. Sarah had not only rejected her mother, but had also destroyed any chance he might have had with her. It was when Vincent Blackwood showed up at his door that William understood his problems were just beginning. The 51-year-old man had the kind of smile that made people check if they still had their wallets. Dressed in a cheap but well-pressed suit, he carried a folder of documents and spoke with the authority of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. "I've come to get my Aunt Evelyn," he announced bluntly, showing papers that proved his relationship. "The family is worried about her condition. It's not right for a woman in her state to be cared for by strangers." The way he said "strangers" carried a dose of contempt that made William clench his fists. Evelyn, who was lucid that morning, panicked at the sight of her nephew. "I don't want to go with him," she whispered to William, grabbing his shirt with desperate fingers. "He gave me medicine that made me confused. Please, don't let him take me." The fear in her eyes was too real to be ignored. Vincent explained with false patience that Evelyn owned some land in the region that needed to be properly managed. "She's not fit to look after her own interests," he argued. "As her only living relative, it's my legal responsibility to care for her." William didn't like the greedy glint in the man's eyes when he mentioned the land. The situation grew more complicated when William discovered, through discreet conversations with older neighbors, that Evelyn's land was located exactly in the area the county planned to develop. A town expansion project that would turn those forgotten acres into valuable lots. Suddenly, Vincent's newfound interest in his sick aunt made perfect sense. The moral dilemma that presented itself to William was devastating. He also needed that land. His cattle operation was dying from a lack of adequate pasture, and without expanding, he would lose the farm that was all that remained of his father's legacy. The bitter irony of the situation did not escape him. To save Evelyn from a greedy nephew, he himself would have to reveal his own interest in the same land. It was during one of those sleepless nights, while Evelyn slept restlessly in the next room, that William made his decision. In the morning, he sought out Sarah at the school. He found her during recess, supervising the children in the playground, and the sight of her there, serious yet gentle with the little ones, made his heart take a painful leap. "I need to talk to you about your mother," he said without preamble. Sarah stiffened immediately, but this time she didn't run. Perhaps the urgency in his voice convinced her it was serious. "Evelyn is in danger. A man showed up claiming to be her nephew, wanting to take her away." Sarah's reaction was unexpected. Instead of indifference, he saw something like panic flash in her eyes. "Vincent," she murmured, as if speaking the name of a disease. "I know him. My uncles always spoke of him as the only decent relative left in the family." But the way she said decent made it clear she had her doubts. It was then that Sarah did something that completely surprised William. She agreed to go see Evelyn. "But it's not because I accept that she's my mother," she made clear, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "It's because I need to understand some things that have never made sense in my life." The reunion was tense and painful. Evelyn cried when she saw her daughter, but Sarah maintained both physical and emotional distance. It was the small revelations that began to break down Sarah's defenses. The birthmark only a mother could know. The lullaby Evelyn hummed softly, the way she knew exactly how Sarah liked her coffee. "My uncles told me you and Dad died in a car accident," Sarah said with a broken voice. "They said I was too little to remember, that it was better not to talk about it." Evelyn shook her head with deep sadness. "They lied, my child. Your father did die, but it was from a heart attack, from working and worrying so much, and I lost everything after that. The farm, the other children who scattered across the country, and finally, you." The pain in Evelyn's words was palpable. "Vincent convinced your uncles it would be better for them to raise you. He said I wasn't fit, that I was going crazy with grief." The revelation that she had more living siblings shocked Sarah. All her life she had believed she was an orphan and an only child. To discover she had an entire family spread across the country, and that she had been deliberately separated from them, was like a punch to the gut. Vincent appeared again the next day, this time accompanied by a sheriff's deputy and involuntary commitment papers. "My aunt is clearly suffering from advanced dementia," he declared with false concern. "I can't allow them to continue taking advantage of her like this." The papers looked legal, stamped and signed by a judge from the neighboring county. William felt desperation rise in his throat. Evelyn hid behind him like a frightened child, and he had no legal means to stop them from taking her. That's when Sarah appeared, bringing with her a revelation that would change everything. "He's not just greedy," she said, her voice filled with an old anger. "Vincent Blackwood is a criminal. When I was a teenager, he did things to me that a child should never go through." The words came out like shards of glass, cutting the air and leaving everyone in shock. The accusations stopped Vincent in the middle of his legal performance. The deputy, an older man from the area, knew Sarah's reputation as a respected teacher and began to question the legitimacy of the documents. "I'll need to check these signatures more carefully," he muttered, putting the papers away. But Vincent was not a man to give up easily. "Those are old and unproven accusations," he retorted with venom in his voice. a resentful woman trying to tarnish my reputation. The smile he gave Sarah was pure malice. Besides, I'm sure Mr. Harrison here also has his interests in my aunt's land. Isn't that right, farmer? The blow was a direct hit. William felt Sarah's gaze turn to him, questioning and hurt. How could he explain that yes, he needed the land, but that it didn't diminish his genuine care for Evelyn? How could he make her understand that he had fallen for both of them, the abandoned mother and the wounded daughter, and that he would do anything to protect them? The truth was, William was trapped between his economic needs and his feelings. The farm was on the verge of bankruptcy. The debts from Eleanor's treatment still haunted him, and without expanding the business, he would lose everything. But looking at Evelyn, fragile and scared, and at Sarah, suspicious and hurt, he knew he would choose to protect them, even if it meant losing everything that remained of his inheritance. The tension that settled in William's house in the following days was almost palpable. Sarah had agreed to stay temporarily to protect Evelyn from Vincent, but the mistrust between her and William created a heavy atmosphere that even affected the older woman. Evelyn, for her part, seemed to be gradually regaining her lucidity, as if her daughter's presence were a more powerful medicine than any drug. It was during one of these tense mornings that the first major revelation came to light. Evelyn was helping Sarah prepare coffee when she suddenly stopped mid-motion, the cup trembling in her hands. "The medicine," she murmured with wide eyes. "He put things in my food. That's why I was so confused." Sarah dropped what she was doing and approached her mother for the first time with genuine concern. "What medicine, Mom?" The word Mom came out naturally, surprising them both. Evelyn explained, in a voice firmer than William had ever heard, how Vincent would periodically show up with vitamins that he insisted she take, always leaving her dizzy and disoriented for days. "He said it was for my own protection," Evelyn continued, her memory slowly returning. "That I got too agitated thinking about the past, that it was better to forget." The implication was terrible. Vincent had been drugging his own aunt to keep her incapacitated while he plotted to take her assets. William suggested they take Evelyn to a doctor for tests, but it was Sarah who insisted they go to the hospital in the next town, far from Vincent's eyes and ears. During the drive, a hesitant intimacy began to form among the three of them. Evelyn told stories from Sarah's childhood that she didn't remember, and Sarah, in turn, spoke of her life as a teacher with a passion William had never seen before. At the hospital, blood tests confirmed their suspicions. Evelyn had been systematically poisoned with a combination of sedatives and dementia medication. "It's a miracle she didn't suffer permanent damage," commented the doctor, a young man who was visibly disturbed by the case. "We'll need to report this to the authorities." The way back was marked by even more painful revelations. Evelyn, with her mind finally clear, told Sarah about her other children: John, who had moved to Chicago; Mary, who had gone to New York; Charles, who worked on an oil rig; Anne, who had married and lived in rural Texas; and Robert, who had disappeared years ago and no one knew if he was still alive. "Vincent convinced everyone I was crazy after your father's death," Evelyn explained with bitterness. "He said it would be dangerous to let an unstable woman care for a small child. Your siblings believed him, or wanted to believe him, because it was easier to rebuild their lives without worrying about me." Sarah cried for the first time since they had reunited. They were not just tears of sadness, but of anger for all the lost years, for a childhood built on lies, for siblings she never knew. William, driving in silence, felt his heart breaking for these two strong women who had been brutally separated by the greed of others. The most shocking twist came when they arrived home and found Vincent waiting on the porch, this time accompanied by a child. A little girl of about 4, with curly hair and big frightened eyes. "I thought you'd like to meet Lily," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah went pale. "What did you do?" she asked in a strangled voice. The child hid behind Vincent, clearly afraid. "Why? I brought your daughter to visit you," he replied with false innocence. "Mrs. and Mr. Peterson are getting too old to care for such an active child." The truth hit William like a thunderbolt. Sarah had a daughter, and by the age calculation, she must have been a very young mother. The way Vincent spoke, the tension in Sarah's body, the child's fear, it all pointed to a story even more sordid than he had imagined. "You have no right to her," Sarah said, but her trembling voice betrayed fear, not conviction. "Oh, but I do," Vincent retorted, pulling papers from his pocket. "I'm the registered father. Remember how easy it was to convince your uncles that it would be for the best. A 17-year-old single girl, in no condition to raise a child." The revelation fell like a bomb. Evelyn immediately understood what had happened and lunged at Vincent with a fury no one would expect from a woman her age. "You monster! You abused my daughter!" William had to hold her back to keep her from hurting the man, but he himself was fighting the urge to break Vincent's neck with his own hands. Vincent pushed the child away and took a threatening stance. "Watch your accusations, old woman. Sarah was quite willing back then. Everyone in town knew it. If she got pregnant, it's because she wanted to." The words were pure poison, meant to hurt and humiliate. It was then that Sarah did something that surprised everyone. She laughed. A bitter, joyless laugh, but filled with a new strength. "You know what I've discovered all these years working with children, Vincent? I've learned to recognize the signs of abuse, and I've learned that men like you always leave a trail." She addressed her daughter in the softest voice she could muster. "Hi, my love. Do you remember Mommy?" The girl hesitated, but something in Sarah's tone reassured her. Slowly, Lily approached, and Sarah hugged her with an intensity that made William swallow hard. "I've been saving money for years," Sarah continued, still holding her daughter, working double shifts, saving every penny. "I knew one day I would have to fight for her." She looked directly at Vincent. "And I also have proof of what you did to me. Diaries, clothes I kept, people who saw how you stalked me." Vincent's expression changed. The arrogance gave way to concern, and then to desperation. "You have nothing," he said, but his voice no longer held the same confidence. "Those are just stories from a troubled teenager." "I have everything," Sarah replied with deadly calm, "including the DNA test I did when Lily was born, proving you're the father, and the medical records from the hospital showing the injuries I had when I was admitted after that night." William watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and horror. Sarah had transformed before his eyes, from a wounded and defensive woman into a relentless warrior. Her strength was both devastating and beautiful. Evelyn, still trembling with rage, approached her granddaughter for the first time. "Hello, my princess," she said in a choked voice. "Grandma is here now." Lily looked between the three people surrounding her with affection and then at Vincent, who was visibly sweating. "He's mean," the child said simply, pointing at Vincent. "He yells at Grandma Peterson and makes her cry." The innocent words were like punches to the gut of all the adults present. It was in that moment that William made his final decision. His financial needs, his land, his farm no longer mattered. These women, these 3 generations of strong, wounded women, were more important than any property. "Vincent," he said in a low voice charged with threat, "you have 10 seconds to get off my property before I call the police. And if you ever come near these women again, I'll take care of you myself." Vincent's cowardice was evident as he backed away from William's determination. "This isn't over," he threatened, but he was already heading for his car. "I have legal rights to the old woman's land and to the child." When he drove off, kicking up dust on the road, a heavy silence settled over the group. Lily snuggled into Sarah's lap. Evelyn sat down heavily in a chair, and William just stood there, trying to process everything that had happened. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The week that followed was a whirlwind of emotions and revelations that would forever change the lives of those people. Lily adapted to William's house with the ease of children, filling the empty rooms with laughter and games that hadn't echoed there for years. Evelyn, her mind finally clear of Vincent's drugs, transformed into a devoted grandmother, rediscovering the joy of caring for someone who loved her without reservation. Sarah, for her part, fought against years of resentment and suspicion. She watched William interact with her daughter and her mother, looking for signs of falsity or ulterior motives, but only found genuine affection. The man she had rejected out of pride was revealing himself to be more complex and generous than she had ever imagined. It was during one of these moments of observation that Sarah made a discovery that left her speechless. Going through William's papers to help him with the farm's accounting, she found Eleanor's medical bills. The amount was astronomical, far beyond what any rural farmer could afford. There were receipts from clinics in major cities, experimental treatments, imported medications, all paid for by gradually selling off property and taking out loans that still bled his finances dry. "You sold almost everything to try and save your wife," she said when she confronted him that night after Evelyn and Lily had gone to sleep. It wasn't a question, but a statement filled with a new understanding. William just nodded, not trying to justify himself or seek pity. "And yet, you took us in knowing you couldn't afford it," Sarah continued, her voice choked with emotion. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper, laden with a vulnerability she had been trying to hide for weeks. William took a long time to answer, choosing his words carefully, "Because some things are worth more than money. Because Evelyn gave me back hope when I thought I had lost everything. And because you—" He hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "Because you got to me from the first day I saw you at the market, and when I found out you were her daughter, I knew fate was giving me a second chance." The confession hung in the air between them like a fragile bridge that any sudden movement could break. Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a warmth she hadn't allowed to blossom for years. But before she could respond, they were interrupted by urgent knocking at the door. It was Nurse Betty from the clinic, accompanied by Mr. Peterson, the uncle who had raised Sarah. The elderly man was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "Child," he said in a broken voice, "me and my wife can't carry this weight on our consciences anymore." The envelope contained documents that would reveal the last and most shocking truth of all. Vincent had not only forged Evelyn's guardianship, he had faked the death of Arthur, her husband. The real Arthur had died, yes, but not from a heart attack as everyone believed. He had been murdered by Vincent in a scheme to steal the proceeds from a cattle sale that would have been enough to save the family farm. "I saw everything," Mr. Peterson confessed through tears. "It was only supposed to be a robbery, but Arthur fought back, and Vincent hit him with a rock. Then he made it look like a heart attack. The revelation was devastating. He blackmailed us afterward, said if we told anyone he would harm the girl. That's why we agreed to raise Sarah away from her mother. It was to protect you both." Evelyn collapsed upon hearing the truth about her husband's death. All these years, she had believed Arthur had worked himself to death to support the family, carrying a guilt that wasn't hers. To discover he had been murdered by his own nephew was like losing her husband a second time. But it was the next revelation that connected all the pieces of the puzzle in a surprising way. Mr. Peterson took another document from the envelope, an old deed to William's farm. "Your father bought this land with money Vincent stole from Arthur," he said with deep shame. "Your father didn't know where the money came from, but we knew it wasn't clean." The shock of discovering that his inheritance had been built on the blood of Evelyn's husband almost made William faint. It all made sense now. The farm his father had suddenly managed to buy, the money that appeared out of nowhere, the sudden prosperity that allowed him to build what would become the Harrison family's livelihood. "That's why I came to this region," Evelyn said with a crystal clarity that surprised everyone. "It was no accident that you found me on that road. I was looking for the family that benefited from my husband's death. I wanted justice, or at least to understand how our tragedy became someone else's good fortune." The revelation created a heavy silence, filled with guilt, pain, and the realization of how fate had cruelly and miraculously intertwined their lives. William felt devastated. Everything he had built was stained with blood. But it was Sarah who broke the silence with a wisdom that surprised everyone. "The sins of the fathers are not ours," she said firmly. "You didn't kill anyone, William. You didn't steal anything. And your generosity towards us proves what kind of man you really are." She turned to her mother. "And you, Mum, you found the justice you were looking for, not in revenge, but in the love you found here." It was then that the sirens arrived. The police were coming for Vincent. Finally, with enough evidence to arrest him for Arthur's murder, the abuse of Sarah, the forgery of documents, and the poisoning of Evelyn. Mr. Peterson had decided to confess everything, preferring to face the consequences rather than continue living with the weight of forced complicity. When Vincent was arrested, resisting and shouting threats until the very last moment, a palpable relief washed over everyone. But it was William's decision that sealed the fate of their intertwined lives. In front of everyone, he tore up the deed to his farm. "This land rightfully belongs to Evelyn's family," he declared, with a conviction that brooked no argument. "I can't build my life on your pain." It was a gesture of absolute generosity that left everyone speechless. But Evelyn, with the wisdom of her years and her newfound peace, refused. "No, my son," she said with motherly affection. "You gave us much more than land. You gave us a family, and families share everything." She looked at Sarah with a smile full of hope. "If my daughter agrees to marry you, this land will belong to all of us." The indirect proposal made Sarah laugh for the first time since they had met, a genuine laugh full of joy and possibility. "First, you have to ask me to marry you properly," she said to William, her eyes shining with happy tears. "And you need to know that I accept. But only if you promise we'll raise Lily together and take care of my mother until the end of her days." The proposal happened right there, in the simple living room of the farmhouse, with Evelyn holding Lily on her lap and Mr. Peterson and Nurse Betty as emotional witnesses. There was no ring or cinematic romance, just the sincere promise of two people who found in love the strength to overcome the tragedies of the past. Months later, when they married in the main church of Mason Creek, the whole town attended. Evelyn was radiant in the new dress Sarah insisted on buying, Lily scattered petals down the aisle like a little princess, and William discovered that it was possible to be happy again even after losing everything. The farm prospered under the couple's joint management. Evelyn's land was legally incorporated into the property, creating an operation large enough to be profitable. Sarah continued teaching. Now, as the principal of the school, she helped expand with the family's combined resources. Evelyn lived to see the birth of William and Sarah's first biological child, a boy named Arthur in his grandfather's honor. She spent her final years surrounded by love, caring for her grandchildren and telling stories that finally had happy endings. Lily grew up in a house full of love, never questioning why she had two grandfathers in heaven and such a large and diverse family. For her, what mattered was that there were never a shortage of arms to hug her or voices to tell bedtime stories. And so, three lives that fate had cruelly separated were reunited in an improvised but solid family, proving that sometimes the best love stories don't begin with passion, but with compassion, and that true justice is found not in revenge, but in the forgiveness that allows for a new beginning. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.